My family, together with 40 others, escaped from Vietnam on a very small fishing boat to Indonesia. It took 14 days.
My mother made all of us keep a backpack, and in it was an address of an aunt in San Francisco, just in case we got lost from each other.
My dad couldn't afford to tell everyone that he had sent me off. He said that, wherever you go, remember who you are, Sunny Lay. Lay is, it's not just your name, it's my name too. And your grandfather's the name, so don't mess it up.
My parents did not let my grandparents know that we were escape. And I could see that my mother never forgive herself for leaving her parents behind. It's too difficult for me to, yeah.
There was no looking back. Certainly there was no looking back for us at that time.
After hearing those men and women recount their boat journeys, it localised for me my own refugee experience. And with the current crisis in Syria and the Middle East, with the exodus of refugees, it made me reflect on my own personal journey. Like many of you in this room, I lead a rather hectic and busy life. I'm often caught up with my daily routines, such as picking up my son from school, cleaning the house, cooking, going to work, in and out of meetings. I almost forgot the impact of the boat people journey, the personal sacrifices my mother was forced to make fleeing war-torn Vietnam, and the challenges we had to overcome to restart our lives here in Australia. Being uprooted from your birth country and being forced to flee were not something a young child should have to go through, nor would they forget. Seeing that small boat on the sea in that clip reignited memories of my family's own escape, just before the war ended in April 30th, 1975. I would ask you to remember that date, April 30th, 1975. It's a significant date for me. For many Vietnamese, though, the key memory in this context is the fall of Saigon. Following that conflict, hundreds and thousands of Vietnamese escaped communist Vietnam, including my mother. Many ended up in refugee camps in Hong Kong, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines. These camps were set up by the UNHCR. While my family were lucky to survive the boat journey, hundreds and thousands of Vietnamese died at seas. I remember our boat encountered a huge storm one night. We literally stared death in the face. The boat pounded so hard against the ocean floor that I thought I was going to fall overboard. The rain was just pelting on my face and the wind howling. It felt like the night was going to swallow us up. We had nothing to protect us except for a piece of plastic tarp. We were huddled underneath this tarp. My mother, with the rosary beads in one hand, holding my younger sister on the other arm, and I held onto my middle sister underneath this tarp. And I thought to myself, there's no way we're going to survive this storm. Our boat was too small to withstand it. It was going to turn over. It was like that storm scene in the movie The Life of Pi. So I don't know if any of you have seen it in this room, have seen it. But we survived the storm and we survived the treacherous sea journey for another week or so. I think the issue of identity, of who is an Australian and what makes for an Australian society is now more important than ever. With the continuing increase of conflicts around the world, we will continue to see an increase in the movements of people seeking asylum, a safe haven, away from the daily bombings, fighting, and uncertainties in their birth countries. And also with climate change-related weather events, we could potentially see another type of refugees developed, adding to the tide of displaced people. These asylum seekers will face the fact that their lives will be in a state of limbo. Their identity will be challenged and their acceptance tested. And who make up these asylum seekers? The majority are people like myself, my mother and sisters. Women and children caught up in the crossfires of opposing forces or circumstances beyond their control. I was just 7 years old when I witnessed my birth country crumbled in front of my eyes. I watched as people, confused and frightened, scrambled to get onto boats, screaming and crying as they rushed everywhere or anywhere their feet could take them. It was total chaos. I remember lying on the boat among strangers and staring out into the night sky. Where were we going, I thought? What was happening? Why were we here? Why did we run? Why am I on this boat with strangers? Why were the women crying? And will I get to go home? I don't know if you can put yourself in that situation. Can you take yourself there? It is hard to localize what it means to lose everything when you've lost it all. It is hard to imagine and put yourself in a situation where your village is bombed and your enemies invading you. I can guarantee you it's unimaginable until it happens to you. It is hard to describe in words the feelings of being uprooted from your birthplace, your motherland. The sense of hopelessness, confusion, lost, fear of the unknown, fear of the future. I didn't know what was going to happen to me, to my family, and to my life. Our boat journey took us to Hong Kong refugee camps, where we stayed for almost a year before we were accepted for resettlement in Australia. We actually escaped the first time from Vietnam to the Philippines for about 3 years, and then my mother and a group of about 30 other people then jumped on a smaller boat and ended up in Hong Kong. So in total, 4 years of displacement. So we were processed by the UNHCR and then flown to Sydney on December the 5th, 1979. Australia was known back then within refugee camps as a big island with the best education system in the world. So when my mother chose Australia, it was because of its education system. We arrived here with one suitcase and no English. Australia had just emerged from the White Australia policy, which meant there was hardly any Asian faces around. I learnt later that the Chinese had come to Australia during the gold rush in the 1800s. But in the 70s, as an 11-year-old, I felt there weren't many looking like me. We were taken to a migrant hostel in Fairfield, a suburb in Wollongong. As soon as we settled into our one-bedroom unit, a red brick block, I couldn't wait to shed my refugee's clothes and my old self. I made a conscious decision to erase as much of my old self as possible and to want to start afresh. I wanted to become an Australian. And for me, that meant I had to learn to speak English very quickly. I learned to make new friends in order to practice my speaking. I was looking for opportunities to grow into a new person. Part of me wanted to strip away all of my Vietnamese heritage completely so I could become a true local Australian. So from the young age of 11, I worked very, very hard to blend in, to embrace the Australian way of life, to speak English as fluently as I could, and even to learn to eat Vegemite on toast. So did I succeed? Am I a local? Local to where? Am I now as local as those who were born here? Am I as local as those of you in this room? In the mid-80s, my mother decided to relocate us from Wollongong to a suburb in Bossley Park near Cabramatta in Sydney's southwest. By that period, there were more refugees from Southeast Asia, including Cambodia and Laos, who had resettled in this region called Cabramatta because of the migrant hostel close by. My mother wanted to be part of that local community. She wanted to move closer to an area where she could relate to the people, the language, the food, and the culture. My sisters and I had to relocalize ourselves. We had left behind friends that we've made since we arrived. While it might look from the outside that we should blend in easily into this very culturally diverse community, it took us a while to fit in, because from my perspective, there were more Asian Australians in this new local area than where we came from in Wollongong. Cabramatta was known as Vietnamatta. Many Vietnamese refugees have called it home since their resettlement. It is the suburb where Indo-Chinese refugees, as we were identified, have become comfortable to be local. And as they felt more local in this area, they started to build their homes, open businesses, and raise their families. But then the wider Australian community started to question their local identity. How Australian are these newly arrived migrant and refugees? Why don't they integrate into our wider society? Why are they all living together? Why don't they spread out? And why do they have signs in those languages other than English? I too questioned this. While I might have looked local and should have fitted into this Indo-Chinese community, the decision I made to be Australian prompted me to do everything I could to leave this area, to move to another area where I could fit in better. Unconsciously, I think, I developed friendships with people, if I could put it, who were mainly non-Asian Australians. And so I found my niche in journalism and thrived. I was determined to be accepted into mainstream media. I did not want to be just another ethnic reporter. But that was a challenge. Being the only Australian journalist of Asian heritage in the industry at the time, and especially coming from an area of high Indo-Chinese population, any stories on ethnics would be assigned to me. I'm an Australian, and I should be able to do stories on general issues and not just ethnic specifics, because how else could I learn and develop my skills? But my English accent held me back from progressing up the reporting ladder, especially on screen. I would argue that being Asian-looking was a hurdle for me. The ABC, after all, was looking after or targeting its major audience, who were mainly white Anglo-Saxon people, in particular men in their 50s plus. But I didn't want for one moment let those hurdles stop me. I persevered and did not allow the barriers within the organisation turn me into a victim. I continued to give my best, constantly learning, producing, trying and creating stories after stories. My main aim was to better myself, improve my journalistic skills, and contribute back. At the end of the day, what was important for me was that I had the privilege to be on this journey, to meet amazing, extraordinary people whose stories captured the essence of humanity and captured the heart. In October 2014, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. It was another challenge in my life I had to confront. It made me reflect on the key milestones in my life and the battles I had to fight to fit into mainstream Australia society. I could have died on that boat journey, but I didn't. I could have died if I had not discovered that lump in my breast, but I found it, and here I am today. I completed my cancer treatment on April 30th, 2015, 40 years after the war ended. With all of these personal challenges, including my foray into politics in the past 7 years, I came to the realization that I have choices. It is my choice to feel accepted or rejected. It is my choice to feel local. I am an Australian. I was a refugee, and I'm of Vietnamese heritage. I don't need the validation from people to feel that I'm Australian. I should be proud that I'm an Australian of refugee background with Vietnamese heritage. The road to becoming local is not easy. When we as a community talk about resettling refugees, we must remember that the journey will not simply end when they reach our shores. As I learned through my experiences, the journey to become local, to being local, may take many more years to come. For those on that journey, I want to encourage them to be optimistic. I would leave you with a quote from Christian D. Larson. The true optimist not only expects the best to happen, but goes to work to make the best happen. The true optimist not only looks upon the bright side, but trains every force that's in him or her to produce more and more brightness in his or her life. Thank you.